I had always enjoyed the solitude of the mountains, especially in the fall when the leaves transformed into a breathtaking mosaic of reds and oranges. It was the perfect time for a weekend retreat, and I had found a secluded cabin online that promised peace and tranquility. It was advertised as an off-the-grid escape, nestled deep in the woods and away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Eager to experience a genuine escape from my busy schedule, I booked it immediately. When I arrived, the cabin was just as described: remote, rustic, and surrounded by dense forest. The air was crisp and filled with the earthy scent of pine. It was a picturesque setting, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me as I unloaded my bags and settled in. The cabin itself was charming in a weathered sort of way, with wooden walls and a stone fireplace. It had everything I needed, or so I thought. The first night was peaceful. I cooked a simple meal, enjoyed a glass of wine, and read by the fire. The quiet of the forest was soothing, and the occasional rustling of leaves outside was more calming than alarming. I went to bed early, wrapped in the comfort of the cabin's cozy interior, and fell asleep quickly. The next morning, I woke up to find that the weather had taken a turn. The sky was overcast, and a steady rain began to fall, adding a new layer of isolation to the cabin. Undeterred, I decided to explore the area. I donned my raincoat and ventured out, taking a hike along the overgrown trails. The forest was even more enchanting in the rain, with the sound of raindrops creating a rhythmic patter on the leaves. After a few hours of hiking, I returned to the cabin drenched but invigorated. I warmed up by the fire and decided to spend the rest of the afternoon relaxing. It was then that I noticed something odd. The cabin's front door, which I was certain I had locked, was slightly ajar. I brushed it off as a gust of wind or a mistake on my part and closed it securely. As evening approached, the storm outside intensified. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain beat relentlessly against the windows. The cabin's interior was warm and dry, a stark contrast to the tumultuous weather outside. I settled in for a quiet evening, but the howling wind and the constant drumming of rain created an unsettling atmosphere. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a loud banging noise. My heart raced as I listened carefully, trying to determine if it was just the storm or something more. The banging continued intermittently, coming from outside. I convinced myself it was likely just the wind causing something to hit against the cabin, but the noise was persistent and unnerving. I mustered the courage to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way to the door, opening it carefully to peer into the dark, stormy night. The wind and rain obscured my vision, but I saw nothing unusual. I scanned the surrounding forest with the flashlight, but there were no signs of movement or disturbances. Relieved but still unsettled, I closed the door and locked it securely. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, but the experience left me on edge. The next morning, the storm had subsided, leaving behind a wet and foggy landscape. The forest was eerily quiet, and I felt a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. I decided to cut my trip short and return home, feeling that the cabin had already given me more than enough adventure. Before leaving, I took one last look around the cabin, ensuring I hadn't forgotten anything. It was then that I noticed something disturbing. The cabinet in the living room, which had been empty when I arrived, now contained a set of old, dusty books and various trinkets. The items seemed out of place and made me feel uneasy. I didn't remember seeing them before, and they were not listed in the cabin's amenities. As I gathered my belongings and prepared to leave, I noticed a small handwritten note on the kitchen counter. It was folded and yellowed with age. I unfolded it with trembling hands and read the message: "Welcome to my retreat. I hope you enjoyed your stay. Remember, not everyone finds their way out of the woods." A chill ran down my spine as I read the note. The message was cryptic and unsettling, leaving me with an overwhelming sense of dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me and that the seemingly idyllic cabin was hiding something sinister. I left the cabin quickly, driving away with a mix of relief and unease. The journey back home was quiet, and the further I got from the cabin, the more I tried to rationalize the events of the past few days. Maybe the banging was just the storm, and the note was a prank left by a previous guest. Yet the feeling of being watched lingered, and the cabin's strange atmosphere left an indelible mark on my memory. In the days that followed, I tried to put the experience behind me. I discussed it with friends who offered various explanations, from mischievous cabin owners to elaborate hoaxes. But no matter how many rational explanations I considered, the feeling of discomfort remained. The cabin, with its strange occurrences and eerie atmosphere, had left me with a lasting sense of unease. Eventually, the cabin disappeared from the rental listings, and I never saw it again. Whether it was taken off the market or something more sinister had happened, I couldn't say. But the memory of that isolated retreat, the unsettling note, and the feeling of being watched remained with me. It served as a stark reminder that sometimes, even the most peaceful escapes can harbor hidden fears, and that some places are better left unexplored. October had arrived, bringing with it a brisk chill that signaled the onset of fall. I was working as a delivery driver for a small local courier service. It was a job I enjoyed, with its simple routine and the satisfaction of completing each delivery. But one chilly October evening, my usual routes took a turn that would haunt me for a long time. The delivery that night seemed routine enough, just a package to be dropped off at a residence on the outskirts of town. The address was unfamiliar, but it wasn't far from my usual route, so I didn't think much of it. As I drove through the winding, tree-lined roads, the sky was overcast, and the setting sun cast long, eerie shadows across the landscape. When I finally arrived at the address, I was met with an unsettling sight. The house was a large, dilapidated Victorian mansion that seemed to have been abandoned for years. The paint was peeling, and the yard was overgrown with weeds and tangled vines. A rusty gate creaked on its hinges as I drove through and parked in front of the house. The mansion's front porch was cluttered with old, weather-beaten furniture and broken flower pots. The front door was slightly ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. I approached with a sense of unease, but the delivery needed to be made. I retrieved the package from the back of my truck, checked the address one last time, and walked up the creaky steps. As I reached the door, I hesitated. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the distant rustling of leaves. I knocked softly but received no response. The door was slightly open, so I pushed it gently and called out, "Delivery for Mr. Sanders," trying to sound cheerful despite my growing discomfort. There was no answer. I peered inside, but the hallway was shrouded in darkness, with only faint outlines of old, dusty furniture visible. The air was heavy with the smell of mildew and decay. I felt a shiver run down my spine but pushed it aside, reminding myself that it was just an old house. I stepped inside, calling out again, "Mr. Sanders, I have a delivery for you." The interior was even more unsettling than the exterior. The house was filled with old, rotting furniture covered in dusty sheets. The walls were lined with old photographs and faded wallpaper, and the floor was littered with debris. The air was thick and musty, and the silence was almost deafening. I noticed a staircase leading up to the second floor and another hallway that seemed to lead further into the house. The package I was delivering was a small box, and I wasn't sure where to leave it. I decided to place it on a small table near the base of the stairs. As I turned to leave, I heard a faint noise from upstairs, a sound that resembled footsteps or a shuffling movement. My heart raced, and I hesitated, wondering if someone was in the house. I called out again, but there was no response. Reluctantly, I decided to investigate. I climbed the creaky stairs, each step echoing in the silence. The second floor was even darker, with only faint light filtering through grimy, dusty windows. The hallway was lined with closed doors, each one seeming more foreboding than the last. The sound of shuffling grew louder, and I followed it cautiously. I reached a door at the end of the hallway and noticed it was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, revealing a dark, empty room. The only thing in the room was a large antique rocking chair facing away from me. The chair creaked softly, as if someone had been sitting there recently. I felt a wave of unease wash over me and decided that it was time to leave. I turned to go back down the stairs, but as I did, I heard a soft, raspy voice from behind me. "Who's there?" I froze. The voice was barely audible, and it sounded weak and frail. I turned slowly, but the room was empty except for the rocking chair. My skin crawled as I realized that the voice had come from nowhere. I quickly made my way back to the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. As I descended, I noticed the front door had swung shut, and I struggled to open it. The door creaked and groaned, as if it had not been opened in years. Finally, I managed to force it open and stumbled out onto the porch, gasping for fresh air. I hurried to my truck and got inside, my hands trembling as I started the engine. I glanced back at the mansion one last time, the shadows of the overgrown yard and the darkened windows seeming to watch me as I drove away. The following day, I reported the strange experience to my supervisor, who was skeptical but concerned. They promised to check on the address, but I never heard back about what was found. The mansion remained a dark memory, and I avoided that route whenever I could. The delivery, however, remained unresolved. I was haunted by the thought of what might have been in that house, who might have lived there, or what might have happened to Mr. Sanders. The old, abandoned mansion became a symbol of the unsettling and unexplained, a reminder that some deliveries should never be made and some places are better left undisturbed. To this day, the memory of that last delivery lingers, a chilling reminder of the eerie unknown that lurks behind the seemingly ordinary and the unsettling truth that sometimes the most ordinary tasks can lead to the most unsettling experiences. It was a typical October evening, with the crisp air and the scent of fallen leaves filling the streets. I was preparing for a quiet night in, settling into my favorite armchair with a good book. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old wooden floors and the distant hum of traffic. It was the kind of peaceful night that made you appreciate the comfort of home. Little did I know the tranquility was about to be shattered. Around midnight, as I was about to close the book and head to bed, the phone rang. It was an old rotary phone, the kind that still had a reassuringly tactile feel to it. I wasn't expecting any calls, especially not at this hour. With a sense of mild irritation, I picked up the receiver. "Hello," I said, my voice breaking the silence of the room. There was a long pause on the other end, filled with static and a faint, irregular breathing. My annoyance quickly turned to concern as the breathing continued, becoming more erratic and heavy. I could barely make out the sound of a person shifting, as if they were trying to speak but couldn't find the words. "Hello? Who's there?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. The line remained silent, except for the unsettling breathing. After a few moments, the line went dead. I checked the phone to ensure it was properly connected and then tried calling back. The call went straight to voicemail with no option to leave a message. I shrugged it off as a wrong number or a prank and decided to ignore it. Just as I was about to return to my book, the phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed no number, just unknown caller. My heart rate quickened, and I hesitated before answering. "Hello," I said again, trying to keep my tone neutral. This time, there was a voice on the other end, but it was distorted and barely intelligible. The voice was calm but carried an undertone of something unsettling. It sounded almost mechanical, as if it was being manipulated through some device. "Are you alone?" the voice asked, its tone oddly clinical. I froze, trying to understand the question. "Who is this? Why are you calling me?" The voice ignored my questions. "Are you alone?" it repeated, this time with a hint of menace. A shiver ran down my spine. I looked around the room, feeling suddenly vulnerable. "Yes, I'm alone." "Why?" There was a pause, followed by a click. The line went dead again. I tried to call back, but the number remained unreachable. My anxiety grew, and I decided to check the locks on all the doors and windows. Everything seemed secure, but the unsettling feeling lingered. I tried to return to my book, but the eerie phone call had shattered my focus. Every creak of the house seemed amplified, and every shadow seemed darker. I decided to go to bed early, hoping that sleep would ease my nerves. As I lay in bed, trying to ignore the sound of the wind howling outside, I heard it again, the faintest sound of a phone ringing. It wasn't coming from inside the house, but seemed to be coming from outside. I lay there in the darkness, trying to determine if I was imagining things. The ringing persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Unable to ignore it any longer, I got up and crept to the window, peering out into the darkened street. There was nothing unusual, just the empty street and the occasional rustle of leaves. I checked the front and back doors again, making sure everything was locked tight. The eerie feeling persisted, but I managed to get back to bed, hoping the sounds would stop. Around 3 a.m., the phone rang once more. This time, I didn't hesitate. I picked up the receiver, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was no response. Instead, there was a strange, almost rhythmic clicking sound on the line, like the faintest echo of a heartbeat. It was the same unnerving breathing from before, but now it was accompanied by the sound of muffled whispers. I hung up, my mind racing. I decided to call the police, describing the strange calls and the unsettling noises. They assured me they would send someone to check things out, but didn't seem particularly concerned. I was left alone with my fear, waiting for the officers to arrive. When they did, they found nothing out of the ordinary. They checked the perimeter of the house and assured me that everything appeared secure. They suggested it might have been a prank or a wrong number and advised me to keep the phone line secure. Despite their assurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The calls continued over the next few days, always at odd hours and always with the same distorted voice asking if I was alone. Each time I would answer, but the calls would end with the same unsettling click or rhythmic breathing. The feeling of being watched or followed grew stronger, and I became increasingly paranoid. I tried to trace the calls, but the phone company was unable to provide any useful information. The number remained unknown, and the calls seemed to come from different sources, making it impossible to pinpoint the origin. The constant anxiety and fear took a toll on my daily life. I became hyper-aware of every sound and shadow, and the once comfortable familiarity of my home now felt like a trap. I even started avoiding being alone, spending more time out of the house or with friends, hoping that the presence of others would offer some sense of security. One evening, I received a final, particularly disturbing call. The voice on the other end was calm, almost soothing, and it spoke clearly for the first time. "I'm outside. I can see you." My blood ran cold. I rushed to the windows, peering into the darkness but saw nothing. I checked the locks once more and tried to calm my racing heart. The police were notified again, but their investigation turned up nothing. They found no signs of an intruder or any unusual activity in the area. The calls eventually stopped as mysteriously as they had begun. I was left with a lingering sense of paranoia and an unsettling feeling that someone had been watching me from the shadows. The phone never rang at odd hours again, and the sense of dread gradually faded, though the memory of those calls remained vivid in my mind. The experience left me with a deep sense of unease and a realization that sometimes the most unsettling threats come from the most unexpected places. The mysterious calls served as a chilling reminder of how vulnerable we can feel, even within the safety of our own homes, and how quickly the comfort of familiarity can turn into a source of fear.